Let me ask you something that might sound strange at first. What if I told you that every time you carelessly share a piece of your story, you're not just talking, you're bleeding out energy you'll never get back? Not symbolically, actually. In the most practical, measurable way possible. Stay with me here because what I'm about to share could radically shift how you move through life. Something deeply troubling is happening right now. We've become a society of chronic oversharers. People spill their entire existence to anyone within earshot. Every dream, every setback, every intimate detail, as if speaking it somehow makes it more real. What they don't understand is that they're engaging in a subtle form of self-sabotage. They're hemorrhaging power, clarity, and potential with every unnecessary word, and they wonder why they feel empty, confused, and strangely stuck.
Before we go further, I need you to do something. If this resonates with you at all, if you've ever felt drained after oversharing or frustrated that you talk more than you accomplish, then subscribe right now. Comment below with one word: silence. Let me know you're committing to protecting your energy differently, because what we're about to explore together requires you to challenge everything you've been taught about communication and connection. Look around. Sit in any coffee shop, walk down any street, and you'll witness it everywhere. People unpacking their entire psychological history to virtual strangers, broadcasting their plans, their problems, their breakthroughs, as if the validation they receive somehow confirms they're alive, they're real, they matter.
But here's what they're missing. When you have a genuine experience, a real moment of insight or clarity about your direction, it exists inside you as something alive and potent. Maybe you felt it, that sudden knowing about what you need to do next. In that moment, the realization is pure, undiluted. It belongs to you completely. It has power precisely because it's contained, germinating, putting down roots in the soil of your inner world. But the second you rush out to tell everyone about it, something fundamental shifts. That living seed gets ripped from the ground before it can take hold. You've converted a breathing, growing experience into a dead description. And descriptions, no matter how beautifully you craft them, are always corpses. They're what remains after the life force has drained away. When you immediately verbalize your insights, your intentions, your inner movements, you're choosing the skeleton over the living being. You're trading substance for shadow. I know the objection already forming in your mind. We've been conditioned to believe that sharing is inherently good, that communication solves everything, that being open is the mark of emotional health. And yes, there's truth buried in that somewhere. But like all partial truths, it's been twisted into something monstrous in our current age. There's a massive difference between genuine, intentional sharing with someone who's earned your trust and this compulsive dumping of your inner world onto anyone who'll listen. One builds connection, the other destroys power. Think about this practically for a moment. When you tell someone about a goal you're chasing, what actually happens? They respond. Maybe they congratulate you. Maybe they warn you. Maybe they launch into their own story. And in that exchange, your brain gets a hit of dopamine. You've received acknowledgement, validation, attention. The problem, your nervous system just gave you a preview of the reward that should only come from actually accomplishing the thing. You've burned the fuel that was meant to propel you forward. You've spent the energy on feeling understood instead of on taking action. This isn't mystical nonsense. This is how human psychology operates at the most basic level. Every time you talk about doing something instead of doing it, you decrease the likelihood it'll ever happen. The discussion becomes a replacement for the deed. You become someone who exists in the realm of intentions and explanations rather than results and reality. But there's an even more dangerous dynamic at play when you constantly broadcast your life. You're inviting other people's consciousness directly into your mental space. Every person you tell becomes a voice in your head. They have opinions, don't they? Fears, concerns, advice. Some mean well. Some are projecting their own limitations onto your situation, but every single one of them now occupies territory in your mind that should be reserved exclusively for your own clarity and inner knowing. I've seen this pattern destroy people's intuition completely. Someone has a crystal clear gut feeling about what they need to do. They know it at the level of their bones. But instead of trusting that knowing and acting on it, they go consult 10 different people. And by the time they've finished collecting opinions, their own clarity has been completely buried. They're drowning in a flood of other people's thoughts, projections, and fears. They came to those conversations knowing exactly what to do. They left them paralyzed, confused, unable to move in any direction. This is precisely why every ancient wisdom tradition emphasizes the power of silence. The Taoists understood what accumulates in stillness. Christian mystics practiced holy secrecy. Buddhist monks knew that certain realizations must be protected from the noise of casual conversation. They weren't being elitist or unnecessarily mysterious. They understood something profound about how consciousness actually functions. When you keep something private, you allow it to develop its full potency. Think of developing a photograph in a darkroom. Every time you open the door to show someone the image before it's ready, you ruin it. The light floods in and destroys the process. Your inner life requires that same protected darkness to develop properly. Constant exposure murders the process before it can complete. When you make a habit of sharing everything, you start experiencing your own life as a performance. You're no longer simply living, you're narrating, observing, preparing the story even while the experience is unfolding. This creates a devastating split in your consciousness. You go for a walk in nature, but part of you is already composing how you'll describe it later. You have a difficult conversation with someone you love, but you're simultaneously rehearsing how you'll explain it to your friends. You're never fully present because you've trained yourself to constantly stand outside your own experience, reporting on it, editing it, choosing which details to emphasize for maximum impact. This is alienation so complete you become a stranger to your own existence. The person covering the story is never the person living it. And here's what makes this pattern particularly insidious. The more you share, the more you need to share. It becomes an addiction. You start feeling that an experience doesn't quite count unless you've told someone. Reality itself feels insufficient without witnesses. You've created a dependency on external validation that leaves you perpetually hollow, perpetually reaching outside yourself for confirmation that your life is meaningful and real. This is the opposite of wisdom. Wisdom doesn't need an audience. Wisdom doesn't require approval from others. Wisdom emerges in the quiet spaces when nobody's watching, when you're simply present with what is, allowing experience to teach you without immediately converting everything into narrative, into currency you can trade for attention. The wise person knows instinctively that certain things must remain unspoken to retain their power. Watch what happens to someone who shares too much of themselves. Other people start to feel ownership over that person. They know your history, your patterns, your weaknesses and struggles. They've catalogued you, filed you away in their mental database, and they begin treating you according to that database instead of who you actually are right now, in this moment. You become a character in their story rather than a living, evolving human being. Worse, you start believing their version of you. You've shared so extensively that you've constructed a public identity that now constrains you. People expect certain behaviors from you. They've heard your story so many times they believe they know you completely. And you, having repeated those narratives endlessly, start thinking you know yourself completely too. You become imprisoned in your own story, trapped by the very sharing that was supposed to liberate you and create genuine connection. The alchemists had a principle they called the sealed vessel. Transformation, they insisted, must happen in containment. If you keep opening the vessel to check progress, to show others what's happening, you release the pressure and heat necessary for transformation to complete. This applies to psychological and spiritual evolution just as much as it applied to their experiments. Your inner work needs that sealed container. Your growth, your struggles and victories, your insights and realizations, these require protection. They need to be held in a space of appropriate privacy while they do their work on you, while they change you, while they forge you into something new. Open that vessel prematurely, and the transformation simply never happens. You remain forever in process, forever becoming, never actually arriving anywhere substantial. I've observed something consistent about people who have achieved genuine depth in their lives. They possess a quality of opacity. not because they're hiding something shameful or being deceptive, but because they understand that not everything requires explanation, sharing, or justification. They carry an inner dignity that doesn't demand constant external validation. When they do speak, people listen because their words haven't been devalued through overuse. Silence has given their speech weight and authority. Compare that to someone who shares everything constantly. Their words carry no weight because there are so many of them scattered everywhere like worthless currency during hyperinflation. Nobody takes them seriously because they've demonstrated that their inner life is cheap, accessible to anyone, requiring no trust or intimacy to access. They wonder why people don't respect them, never realizing they failed to respect themselves first. They've made themselves common, predictable, ordinary. Let me be completely clear about what I'm advocating here and what I'm not. I'm not suggesting you become secretive, deceptive, or closed off from genuine human connection. We need connection. We need to be able to share meaningful experiences with people we trust. We need to be witnessed. What I'm talking about is discrimination, the ability to distinguish between sharing that enriches your life and sharing that drains your vital energy. Before you speak about something personal, ask yourself why you're sharing it. Are you genuinely seeking counsel from someone whose wisdom you respect? Are you creating authentic intimacy with someone who's earned your trust over time? Or are you just filling an uncomfortable silence, seeking validation, trying to make yourself feel real by getting witnesses to your experience, feeding an addiction to attention? These questions matter because your energy matters. Your inner life is precious, not cheap. Most of the time, if you're brutally honest, you'll discover it's the latter. That's when you need to practice what I call the discipline of silence. Hold it in. Let the experience work on you privately. Let your plans develop in darkness. Let your insights ripen before you harvest them and distribute them to others. This isn't repression. Understand that clearly. This is maturation. This is allowing things to complete their natural cycle within you before exposing them to external elements. When you do this, something remarkable happens. You become genuinely present in your own life. You stop experiencing everything through the filter of how you'll explain it later. You begin actually living instead of narrating. And paradoxically, when you stop needing validation from others, when you stop scattering your energy in every direction, you become more powerful, more grounded, more authentically yourself. Your presence becomes undeniable because it's no longer diluted. People sense this quality. They recognize depth, even if they can't articulate what they're recognizing. You become like a deep well instead of a shallow stream that makes noise but evaporates in the sun. And that depth, that groundedness, that self-possession in our shallow age, this is revolutionary. This is how you keep your soul intact. Guard it with the fierceness it deserves. Protect it like you would anything precious and irreplaceable. Consider what happens in nature. A seed doesn't announce its growth. It doesn't send progress updates about what's happening underground. It simply grows in darkness, in silence, accumulating power until it breaks through the soil as something undeniable. Your inner transformations work exactly the same way. They need that underground time, that silent gestation period. When you constantly update everyone on your progress, you're like a seed that keeps popping up to announce it's still growing, burning all its energy in the announcement instead of the actual growth. There's tremendous power in what remains unspoken, in what stays private, in what quietly accumulates. Our culture has completely forgotten this. We've been programmed to believe that if something isn't shared, it doesn't exist. That if an experience isn't broadcast, it somehow doesn't count. This is insanity. This is exactly backwards. The things that matter most are often the things that cannot be shared, should not be shared, lose their essence the moment you put them into words. Your deepest spiritual experiences, your most profound realizations, your most tender feelings, these are too precious for casual conversation, too important to be reduced to anecdotes. When you keep them sacred, when you hold them close, they continue working on you, changing you, informing your being at levels much deeper than language can reach. There's also the reality of energy parasites, though that sounds dramatic, but it's real. When you share indiscriminately, you attract people who feed on your stories, your drama, your energy. They don't actually care about you. They care about the entertainment value of your life. They're spectators, not participants. And you, by constantly providing content for their consumption, train yourself to live for an audience instead of for yourself. You become a performer in your own life rather than the person actually living it. This is a terrible trade. You're exchanging authentic experience for the hollow satisfaction of being interesting to people who fundamentally don't matter. The discipline I'm describing requires real strength. It goes against every social conditioning we've absorbed. It feels uncomfortable initially. You'll feel the urge to fill silences, to explain yourself, to share. Resist it. Sit with that discomfort. Feel what it's like to have experiences that remain yours alone, to have thoughts that aren't immediately externalized, to have a rich inner life that doesn't require constant validation. This is where genuine power accumulates. This is where real transformation happens. This is where you discover who you actually are beneath all the narratives you've been telling about yourself. And what you'll find is that you're far more than those narratives ever captured. There's a kind of freedom that comes from not having to explain yourself, not having to justify your choices, not having to convert your life into digestible content for others. You simply are. You simply do. You simply experience. And that simplicity, that directness, that lack of mediation between yourself and your life, this is what it means to be truly alive. The ancient Zen masters understood this perfectly. When asked about the meaning of Buddhism, one master simply held up a flower. No explanation, no elaboration, just the thing itself. This is the quality of consciousness I'm pointing toward. Direct, immediate, unmediated by the constant need to explain, to share, to get approval for your existence. Your life is not a democracy. You don't need everyone's vote on how to live it. You don't need consensus on your choices. You don't need approval for your experiences. What you need is the courage to live according to your own inner knowing, to trust your own perceptions, to let your life unfold according to its own mysterious logic without constantly checking with others to see if you're doing it right. And this courage grows in silence, in privacy, in that protected space where you're accountable only to yourself and whatever you consider sacred. This is where character develops. This is where integrity gets forged. What would happen if you stopped broadcasting your life? What would happen if you let experiences simply be experiences without converting them into stories? What would happen if you pursued your goals in silence until you actually achieved them? What would happen if you protected your inner world with the same intensity you protect your physical home? I believe you'd find that life becomes more vivid, more real, more yours. You'd discover depths in yourself you didn't know existed because you were always too busy skimming the surface, collecting material for your next conversation. You'd discover that silence isn't empty but full, pregnant with possibility. And you'd understand what the mystics have always known, that the most profound truths cannot be spoken, that the deepest wisdom lives in the spaces between words, and that your soul, your precious, irreplaceable soul, requires protection from the noise of the world if it's to grow into its full magnificence. Guard your silence, protect your privacy, live your life instead of narrating it. This is the path to genuine presence, to real power, to authentic wisdom. This is how you keep your soul intact in a world that's constantly trying to fragment it into shareable pieces. Remember this well. Your power lies not in what you say, but in what you choose to keep sacred.